And when one really perceives, understands the space, that means you have understood this emptiness, simply this emptiness of other objects, material things. And that's all. So it is so-called this direct negation, in which it is emptiness is a negation of all these material obstructing objects. So similarly, this is only analogy. Similarly, when we understand that kind of ultimate reality in terms of the emptiness is also like that. Total negation, leaving nothing else in its place. Not something like empty mind or something like that. Mind which has no conceptions, no thoughts or something like that. That is not total emptiness, because you are aware of the mind. So you are perceiving a mind which is maybe free from delusions or something like that. That is not emptiness. Emptiness is simply that total lack of this total disappearance, that non-existence of this false reality and this false grasping is simply that. Emptiness is a result of the ultimate analysis. And now you should have understand also what ultimate analysis. And so through ultimate analysis, then the conclusion that to which you reach is this total disappearance, total loss, total lack of that false self or whatever, this false reality. That means that now we have to accept that actually all these things are non-existent, because one has not found it in the ultimate analysis. So therefore, does it mean that ultimately or actually there is nothing exists? So our whole this idea of something existing, is it totally wrong? It's all gone wrong? That is again the other extreme. So therefore, the things do not exist inherently when ultimate analysis applied on them. So ultimate analysis, one does not find that kind of self and so forth. However, not finding by the ultimate analysis is not sufficient to completely prove the non-existence, total non-existence of the phenomena. When something is not found through ultimate analysis, that is far from being a reason to prove that they are non-existent. Because everything, although do not exist ultimately in that way, so therefore you don't find it also in that way, but it exists in another way. How does it exist? It exists conventionally, it exists relatively, it exists interdependently. So when something exists conventionally, it is whatever exists conventionally, that is sufficient proof and reason for its existence. For the things to exist, it doesn't have to exist ultimately. When something exists relatively, conventionally, interdependently, that is perfect, the proof for its existence. So therefore everything do not exist in the ultimate analysis, but still everything exists conventionally, relatively, interdependently, and that is sufficient for their existence. And actually that conventional mode of existence, this relative mode of existence, this interdependent mode of existence, how all things are existing only in that way, that is also the main reason also to prove that the ultimate nature of all of them is the emptiness. So therefore that conventional truth, this conventional mode of existence, conventional truth, the relative truth, is the very reason to establish the emptiness. Emptiness is the also very reason to establish the conventional truth. So that way the two truths, conventional, ultimate truth, are mutually supporting each other, one being the reason for the other. They are complementary to each other. They are not the opposite of each other. However, in such kind of research, one difficult point is, for ordinary beings like ourselves, we cannot distinguish, because we mix the conventionally existing relative existing phenomena and our false fabrication. We have also added something added, false fabrication, and actually the conventionally existing relative existing phenomena, they got totally mixed in us. They appear to us together in a mixed manner. We cannot distinguish what is really the relatively existing, the interdependent existing, the conventional truth which is truly existing, and which part is that false reality which we have projected, which we have added on them. That is one difficult point. One has to distinguish. So therefore, one cannot go about the search of the emptiness, just simply think, oh, where is the flower? Flower is not here on the top or not bottom, and therefore there is no flower. That's already not at all. That way one cannot become the good ultimate analysis. First one has to recognize, distinguish what is our faulty, our contribution, our false contribution to the phenomena, that the false reality which we only created by our ignorance alone, which has no base, any good base whatsoever. That is also there in our perception of the thing. So that has to be distinguished. And that when one has recognized better this false reality that we have created, projected by own ignorance mind alone on the basis, that we have to distinguish. And that takes time. That is not simple. This whole meditation on the emptiness, meditation of the selflessness is not simple. First of all, we have to recognize this falsity itself we don't know. We know there's something big, something very false, but how this falsity is also not clear. So therefore, one has to first meditate on seeing how this false, for example, false self of one's I, how does it appear for a long time? How does it really appear? At first, one cannot distinguish anything. Nothing more we see. It just is the self. It's the relative self. This is me. And it takes time to distinguish and to see how really that falls. At some point, if one thoroughly and carefully observe, very carefully and precisely observe, then slowly we can distinguish the two. What we have to recognize is false, this additional self. And then slowly, first it's kind of hidden there, it's kind of mixed, but slowly, again like milk and water, then it will come out. It will slowly, like a thief hiding somewhere among the good people, slowly then can be singled out. And at this point, then we apply our ultimate analysis. So is that really true as it appears to me? Really, is there some base in it or not? Then one applies the ultimate analysis. Where is such a self which seemed to be so concrete now, which seemed to be so whole, so complete, seemed to exist somewhere here, and where is this self? Then we look from top to the bottom of our body, mind, everything, and then one will find there is nowhere. There is only false reality that we have projected. There's no way. And then one finds total negation of that, total emptiness. Then we are coming to the real emptiness. So therefore, precisely speaking, there are like different kinds of the self. Two that are existing and one that is non-existent. That means there is first a relative self, a relative person, relative self, who eats, who drinks, who sleeps, and so on, and who also responds when somebody asks, where are you? Then says, I am here. And this one self, which is the relative self. The humble relative self is the kind of thing, and which is existent. Then there is a self which is imposed on that, imposed on our aggregates, on this relative self, by our ignorance, which is a self which seems to exist, independently, inherently from its own side, quite in a concrete manner. That is the way how it appears now to our mind most of the time, and we believe in it. That is one self, which is non-existent. And then there is also a self which, after having realized the truth, the emptiness, and those Arya beings who also has seen directly the emptiness, but then afterwards, when they are out of such absorption in the emptiness, when they see again the world, when they deal with the conventional reality, then they see oneself and other beings in a very illusory nature, something which appears but lacking inherent existence. This kind of illusory nature of that's very correct, that's how it is. So that is also one more self. So therefore there are three kinds of self. So we are only dealing with the first and the second. So at this point, in order to really distinguish this existing relative self and this false self, this is a very important point and key in this process of meditation, which is called the understanding the object of negation, what one has to empty. You cannot just empty anything. One has to empty the false reality, the false thing. So therefore, it is called the conviction or understanding about the object of negation. That means this false reality. That is the first thing that comes in such a process. This kind of false view of the false reality, false self, is something which is there always with ourselves, and this becomes particularly more obvious when we are in a very strong emotional state of joy, or emotional state of fear, emotional state of great suffering, or the emotional state of great anger, or great attachment, and especially great pride, arrogance, or when people praise you and so on, then one feels particularly having praised, then one feels very great. In such kind of emotional state, or one is really afraid of something, depressed and so on. In such emotional, unbalanced emotional state, exaggerated state of the mind, then this false self becomes more than ever very, very obvious, very strong, very clear. So therefore the masters say these are the moments to observe how this false self is actually playing in us, how and what kind of face it has, what kind of form it has. In such moments will become easier to recognize. Otherwise it's quite hidden and very much mixed with our existing self. But this exaggerated form of the self is, in such moments, becomes very, very clear. There are in some meditators, some yogis, they particularly go to the place which is particularly frightening and things like that, and then try to observe how that false self manifests in such situation. It is for the sake of recognizing better that object of negation. Some meditators go to the haunted place or something like that, which one feels very insecure and very frightened. And then said, well, instead of being frightened and completely carried away by it, then one looks back. Who is that which is so frightened? Then of course I am frightened, but how is this I at this moment? Then one finds this totally illogical and totally unreasonable, totally fabricated of the eyes, then manifest very, very strongly. But of course does not mean that we have to all go and look for some haunted house. That is not at all the point. In the same way, when we are praised and when we are very, very successful and when we are overjoyed or something due to whatever reasons, or we are terribly depressed and so on, these are equally the moments to recognize, to pinpoint that kind of false self, this kind of irreasonable, illogical, ridiculous, but still seem to exist very, very strongly, something complete. This I always appears as something complete. Then there are also many different feelings depending on what the situation is. Sometimes something very dark, or sometimes something so extraordinarily bright, sometimes so big, or sometimes so small, almost sinking into the ground, or all kinds of different appearance, that kind of impression that one may get when one observes carefully in different situations, observing the mode of existence of this false self. Sometimes if it's just something like a hole standing in the middle of one's body or something like that, all kinds of impressions that one may get, the impression of that false self. One has to observe and familiarize with this kind of searching, this kind of observation. It is more of observation, and then when these have become clear, we can also use those ultimate analysis and so on, and then one can also really eliminate them. These kind of false constructions, this false self, whatever, then can get eliminated. The right procedure is not that we analyze on any object and see where is the flower, When these are explained like that, but in the actual, the meaning of such emptiness cannot be understood correctly if we just apply very rough analysis. Where is the flower? Is that in the bladder, in the leaves, or in the petals, and then in any of these you don't find the flower. So therefore, oh, now there is no flower. So this is a false, that can lead easily to total dissolution of the flower. And this is not the whole point of our meditation. Our point of the meditation is not to destroy the phenomena, but to destroy the fabrication of the phenomena. Even though through such kind of search of where is the flower on this object, then finally finding nowhere any part of this as a flower, and that way we take, well, then maybe flower is non-existent. That is not true. Even if the flower does not exist in that way, it can exist in another way, and that's how it is. They exist in another way, in the way already explained before, nominally, conventionally, relatively, and so on. That way they exist and functions everything very well. That does not serve much purpose. So therefore, before emptying anything, first we have to understand what is that to be empty. That means the false fabrication on all these things which are solely creation of our ignorance. That is what we have to approach, what we try to pinpoint clearly. So that's what is meant here by this emptiness. And then it says, this emptiness pervades all phenomena. There is that reality which is unspeakable meaning. You put aside, abandon the mind-made, what is mind-made, and look at the nature of emptiness. That means that kind of emptiness of that false fabrication of our ignorance, that is the ultimate reality, that emptiness, and that is something that one has to understand and to realize, and that is a meaning which is also unspeakable. That means the experience of the emptiness, when somebody directly experiences that empty nature, that emptiness, that ultimate reality, it is something which is experienced individually by oneself, and this is not something that can be explained in words. Exactly how one sees, how one experiences, is something that the experiencer, that meditator, that Arya being experiences in one's mind. But exactly how it is in one's mind cannot be described in words to somebody who has not attained that realization. So therefore it is unspeakable. So that experience of the emptiness is something which is direct, something which is unconceptual, not conceptual. First, of course, one understands the emptiness also on the basis of wisdom, through hearing, through contemplation, and so on. That way one must understand the intellectually what it's conceptually its meaning. But then finally, through the meditative wisdom, one has to experience that kind of the ultimate reality, the emptiness. That way one attains the direct realization, and that as one experiences direct realization, it cannot be explained to somebody else in terms. That experience, that is something which individually has to be experienced. So that's what is meant here. So one should meditate, and that emptiness, that total emptiness, that emptiness should be exactly the emptiness of this inherent existence of the phenomena. Emptiness of that false reality in which we have believed for so long time. The total negation of that. It's just that emptiness, and it is not some kind of state of mind, some kind of thing that is just our mind made, some intellectual idea or some state of mind or something like that. And also with regards to the selflessness, there are a lot of different kind of ideas about this kind of descriptions, but it's not any of those. It simply means that kind of empty of that inherent existence in which we always believed, and that way of appearance is also nothing very different from the way how things appear always to us. In this way, what is actually mistaken. And now when one realize that all that thing, that everything seemed to exist from their own side, very in a concrete manner with independent nature. That is that fabrication we are making, and emptiness here means simply the negation of that. And we make a whole lot of special qualities to this object of negation. Act of negation should be like this and like that. In various philosophical arguments, there are lots of arguments and point of views about this object of negation, which are, some are too much, some are too little, and so on. All those are not helpful. So that is what it says. Put aside all those mind-made ideas about the reality, about the emptiness. And simply one has to look in that bare emptiness of the false reality. When it says, abandon all this mind-made, that means that this kind of ignorance or grasping to the false reality, this is not a philosophical mistake or error or something like that, or doctrinal some assertion. Instead, it is that very common the view that everybody, we all samsaric beings have, the animals and humans, and we all have this spontaneously kind of false view of grasping everything from each and everybody, each and everything existing from one's own side with this very concrete identity, and which is not only something, an idea of some philosophical people, but it has this very natural and this very spontaneous nature. It is, so therefore it's a natural mistake, not a philosophical mistake. So therefore everybody has that. Human beings, intelligent, less intelligent, even the animals, we all have that same grasping of ignorance. And so when one analyzes and refutes it and really understands the total lack of it, it is that the lack of this false appearance and this false grasping and so on, which is universal, which is what we have always, with everybody has. That is what one has to understand, and that way one should understand emptiness and not it as some kind of intellectual, something philosophical mistake. So when we come to the point of shunyata or emptiness, which Buddha has taught, then it is really the subtlest view. But for everybody it is not easy to immediately to come to that point. So Buddha very skillfully also taught other levels of selflessness. Selflessness, which is first of all of negating a self, which is philosophically postulated permanent soul, something which is independent, which is permanent, and things like that, which is single, etc. There are many who believes in such kind of soul or whatsoever, which is also kind of grasping to some kind of false self. But these are very gross. These are philosophical error. When we talk about here the emptiness, is not referring to that kind of selflessness, and there are still some which are still more subtle than that, however not really the subtlest. But when we talk about here this kind of emptiness which I mentioned here is the subtlest. The subtlest one is not a philosophical error, it is a natural fabrication of our mind, a natural grasping of our mind, which human beings, animals, we all have, and that is the very root of our cyclic existence, very root of all our delusions. That's what is in this emptiness, even though here's only one verse, but the essential meaning of this emptiness which is mentioned is exactly referring to that kind of subtlest meaning of the emptiness. This is also not only applied to one's individual person, but also everything, every phenomena that exists, starting from one's own individual person. All are lacking this kind of independent nature, one's own nature, inherent nature, self nature. All these means the same thing. In the Heart Sutra, all the phenomena, pure or contaminated or whatsoever, all being empty, means this kind of empty. All lacking this inherent nature, independent nature, without any difference from form up to the state of enlightenment. All are empty. And also the important topics of the Dharma, or path, or practice, Four Noble Truths, etc. are all empty of any kind of inherent existence. There is no difference. It's not such that all what is ordinary do not exist inherently. But some higher phenomena like enlightenment, liberation, some kind of independent existence, there's no such things. All these things, whatever, samsaric, nirvanic, enlightenment, all are different parts of the conventional truth. So all are interdependently existing. They are all interdependent exist. They are all relative truth. They are conventional truth, interdependent truth. So because being all interdependent existing and such a conventional reality, there is none among these that exist independently with one's own nature. So therefore, the ultimate nature of all those things, higher or lower, whatever, are completely empty. In the ultimate sense, they are all empty. Empty of one's inherent nature. One should meditate on that ultimate reality and that sphere of emptiness. And the reason for that, why things are all like that, is very important to meditate on the right reason. The right reason is the interdependent existence. There is nothing that exists inherently, or all are empty because they are all existing interdependently of their parts, their names, the conceptions that follows the names, and as well as their cause, their conditions, and also in relation to many other things like self and others are totally relative to each other. In relation to oneself with other is other, oneself is self. But in relation to the other, oneself is the other and the other is self. So like this, that way, everything exists also in that way relatively. All phenomena are denominated. That way all phenomena are identified. And only that way every phenomena are existing and functioning. So therefore all are conventional, all are relative, all are nominal. After all, it's all names. Even Buddha is a name. So like that, that level everything functions. That level everything, whatever existing then exists. Thanks to such a nature of existing, then there is no any kind of independent identity, independent self, independent, inherently traceable, any kind of self nature is nowhere to find. So therefore every phenomena are therefore empty. If there is such kind of independent, inherent nature of the things, then things cannot function anymore. Then everything is blocked with one's own self nature. Then even the things like changes that occurs, all the various functions of the phenomena can no more work. Then suffering cannot be overcome, happiness cannot be developed, and ignorance cannot be overcome, because each has its own independent existence. So therefore suffering is independently existing, delusions are independently existing, then there's no way to free from the delusion. But in reality, no suffering is, no delusion is independently existing. They are all dependent existence. They all depend upon cause, condition, many things. So therefore, if one brings about those necessary change in cause and condition, suffering changed, delusion eliminated, and virtues can grow, because that's the way how things work. If each and everything they have their independent nature, inherent nature, then suffering will always be suffering, and delusion can never overcome. Then after all nothing functions, everything is kind of blocked. However, every phenomena is free of this kind of blockage, this kind of self nature. So therefore the ultimate nature of all phenomena is kind of free. So therefore Buddha even used the term, all things are naturally liberated, naturally free. That means I say all things are naturally empty, or because naturally empty, all things are naturally free. That does not mean that we are already attained freedom. That does not mean. It means simply that all phenomena are free of this kind of independent self. There is no such blockage. So therefore everything can change. Things are somewhat not so rigid and hard. Things are kind of flexible. So therefore everything can happen, everything can change, everything works. If everything are blocked with their own inherent self, then nothing can function. However, this is not the case. So therefore everything functions. So that's why Buddha said form is empty, and then emptiness is the form also. Because they are empty, because the form has no inherent self, it is empty of this. Therefore the form can exist. Therefore the form can manifest. When form can change, form can grow, etc. If they are not free in this way, their nature is kind of blocked with their self-nature, then nothing functions. Then the whole world will be then kind of stand still. Nothing will move anymore. Yes, because they are, the form is empty of any kind of self-existence, independent existence. So therefore, form can manifest. Form does exist, form can be born, form can become old, form can cease, and form can become better or worse or everything possible. Because they all depend upon the cause and conditions. There's not any independence. Everything depends upon cause and conditions. Sentient beings like us, we depend on a karma, and likewise, everything that is there, form, etc., are all totally depend upon their cause and conditions. And independent of those cause and conditions, there is nothing which can exist independently, inherently. And after all these things, whatever we think of, form, etc., it is also totally imputed by the name and concept. Form is form because that's how it's called in the world. And so depend upon that convention of the world and how they are that way identified. So that way the form gets identity or the existence in this way established. One should meditate on the emptiness without forgetfulness. One should place one's mind in the state of the ultimate reality, the emptiness. And then we also, after each of such a reflection, such mindfulness, we always direct our request to the Guru upon one's head and ask for help us to realize this ultimate reality correctly, perfectly. And that way, again, the rays of light and nectar comes from the Guru, which is of the nature of such wisdom that the Guru has already in his mind, coming in the form of rays of light and nectar, enter in ourselves, and then completely merge with our own mind, and also the little understanding that we, or with the attempt of understanding that we, towards ultimate reality, and completely merge it with that little wisdom, and that way that little wisdom then increased, perfected, through the integration of the wisdom of the Guru. And also the same thing we think about other sentient beings around ourselves. That way all beings, oneself, others, all generate the perfect attainment of the wisdom of understanding ultimate reality. If one combines like this, then it becomes very meaningful and very transforming. That way we have come to the fourth verse. Maybe that's a good place to stop.